In this video, we'll look at the SUMIF, COUNTIF, SUMIFS, and COUNTIFS functions. The difference between if and ifs is the COUNTIF or SUMIF will allow you to select values based on one criteria, whereas ifs will allow you multiple criteria. Let's begin. We'll look at criteria 1 here, which is green kale. We're going to look at this data. We're going to count the number of times that we have a sale of green kale. A couple of ways to do this. We'll go ahead with COUNTIF. It asks for the range, so we'll take a look at our range here. Here are the values. And we could put green kale in quotes. That tells us 3. But a lot of times we like to be able to check for other values, and it's easier then if instead of putting green kale in quotes, if we take this out, create a cell that we point to that cell, press enter. So let's say, for example, we want to check for orange. We just type orange. We see we have 4 in the orange side. You may get a 3 here. I added an orange over here so that we would get something other than a 3. I think each of the items here is sold 3 times. So we can go ahead now and check by date in the same way. We can equals count the number of sales that occurred on a specific date. So we'll select the date column. There's our range. If you want to check for dates, you have to enclose it in quotes because it needs to treat the date as text. Parenthesis 6. Again, though, it's easier if instead of typing in the date, if you point to a cell reference that contains a date, that way you can change that cell reference and look up sales on another date. Maybe we want to look at things sold on the 15th. So let's look at that. We see we sold 9 on the 15th. So that's a little bit easier to do. And greater than 100, there are 3 ways to do this, probably more than that. We can do at count if. I'll take a look at our range. It shows the crates. We want to know when we sold more than 100 crates, how many sales we had that were over 100 crates. And we can put the operator in quotes and then connect that to a value with the ampersand. 100. That will get us our solution. Or we can put the whole thing in quotes, greater than 100. That will get us the solution. Or we can again point to a cell that we put the value in, and this can be really useful here, and get greater than 100. That way we can see pretty clearly what we're measuring here. Let's use the SUMIF function then to add, and I'll just use the cell reference from this point forward for the criteria rather than typing in the criteria. Equals SUMIF. Here's our criteria range. It's asking for the range. We're looking for green kale in that range. And when we find green kale, we want to know where's the range that we go for the numbers to sum. So SUMIF is a little different than COUNTIF. It asks for a few more criteria. So we have 169. We could change this to orange and get 433. Same way with the date. We want to know on a particular date how many crates we sold, for example. The title here is to add crates. So we'll do sum if. We'll look at our date field. That's the criteria. That's what we're looking for. We'll go ahead and look for this value. We won't put it in quotes. We'll just point to it. And then when we find that, we're going to come over here and count the number of crates. We could count total sales. Also, sum that. See how much we sold. We're just counting crates. We can change the date here. Let's change it to the 15th. You can see we get 781 on that day. And again, greater than 100, we can sum if, and in this case, the range that we're looking at is the same as the sum range. And when that's the case, we'll just point to this criteria. We don't have to enter the sum range because we're going to use the criteria range. So we'll just go ahead and close it there since sum range is optional and press enter and get 401. So that's count if and sum if. Now we have multiple criteria, criteria 1, criteria 2. So we'll use the count if s to solve for this. Equals count if s. We'll take a look at our first criteria, which is the name of the product. And now what's the criteria? That was our first range. Here's the criteria in that range. The second criteria range is sales rep. And we'll look for this sales rep. And we see that we sold 1 dinosaur kale. You may have 2 because I changed an orange dinosaur kale. One of the dinosaur kales sold by Chin, I changed it to orange. So you may have a 2, I have a 1. You can check that with some others and see. Let's do the next one. It doesn't matter which order you do these searches in. You can, this says criteria 1, criteria 2, but you can search criteria 2 first, then criteria 1. So let's do this count if s. We'll take the range for criteria 2 this time. We'll do that one first. There's the range, there's the criteria. We'll take the range for criteria 1 next, which is the column of dates. There's the range, there's the criteria. Close that with the parenthesis, press enter. We have 2 of those. And then finally, similarly, we can use count if s and take a look at our salespeople, comma, and we're looking for Thai in particular, and then our crates sold, and we're looking for greater than 75. So we'll take that, and we see that we have 3. Now sum if, a little bit different. Again, we just add a couple of elements. Equals sum if s. The first, the sum range that we're looking at, that's what it wants to know first. Well, what we want to know is total sales. So that's going to be our sum range. We'll enter that. Then it wants to know, all right, what's the range for the first criteria? Well, let's follow the headings here. The first criteria here is dinosaur kale, so that's produce sold. So there's the range for that, comma. There's the value that we're looking for, dinosaur kale, comma. The next one is sales reps, so we'll grab our sales reps, comma, and we're looking for Chin. We're looking to see the sales Chin had for dinosaur kale. Let's go ahead and press enter. He had 3,648. Now you might get something different because I changed one of Chin's from orange from dinosaur kale to orange. You might have something like 5,440. All right, let's do this sum if s. We're looking for total sales, so we'll go ahead and that's our column we're going to sum. Once we satisfy our criteria, we're going to go and get the values from this column to sum. And let's do them in the reverse order this time. So we'll do criteria first, then criteria 1. It doesn't matter. The produce sold then is the first range. There's the item. We're looking at dates that it's sold. There's the dates they sold. We're looking for that date. So we have the total sales of bananas on the 14th of August, 2013. Let's do the last one. This one's a little bit different. We're going to find the total sales for Sue where the transaction sale amount was less than or equal to $1,000. So we're going to use the same column that we sum as one of the criteria columns. So we'll enter equals sum if S. We'll take a look at our column where we're going to sum when we meet the criteria. Then we'll take a look at the sales rep column as the first criteria range. We'll look for Sue in there. We'll go back to our sales column as the second criteria range. And we'll look for less than or equal to $1,000. And that gives us the solution. All right, let's go ahead and move down to the next section. This section is just a little bit of repetition. We're going to use the SUMIF. We're going to add up the sales for each sales rep on each day indicated. Let's go ahead and get our sum if S. We'll get our sum range, and we're going to copy this down. So I'm going to set this to absolute so that it locks into that range. Then I want my first criteria range, which is sell date. So I'm going to, again, I'm going to copy this. So I want to make that absolute. I press F4. That makes the whole range reference absolute. But I'm going to copy it down. So I want to, as I copy it down, select each new row's sell date. So I want to leave that relative by sales rep. So again, I'll select this range of sales reps. And I'm going to make that absolute by pressing F4. And then again, I want to leave this relative because as I copy this down, I want to get the corresponding sales rep. So we'll put a closing parenthesis there, press enter. Now I can just take this, use my autofill node. I can double click, I can drag, whatever, but it will then pull those formulas down. I'll move down to one of the calculated formulas, press F2, check my work. Yes, I have the correct ranges selected. I have the correct line selected, so my formula is good. Let's go down and do the last exercise. All right, in this exercise, just a little bit of a twist. We want to check sales volumes for salespeople and their activity in particular regions. So the sales for each sales rep in the West, for example. This exercise introduces a couple of keystrokes that you use when you're dealing with large volumes of data. So we'll go ahead and take the sum if S and select the first range. It's going to be sales. That's what we're counting up. So I'm going to place my cursor at the first sales, but I have a lot. I have maybe 40 or 50, I don't know, 100 rows. I'm not sure how many. I'm going to copy this down. So I want to make this an absolute cell reference, but I don't want to page down to the end here. So I'm going to do a keystroke. I've placed my cursor right here at the start of my range. I look at my keyboard. I'm going to push down the shift key and I'm going to hold it down. Then I go over to my keypad and I see the end key. I'm going to press and release the end key. Then I see the down arrow, straight down from the end key. I'm going to press and release the down arrow. That's going to select the entire range. Then I'm going to release the shift key. So now I've released all keys. I'll press F4 to make that column absolute. That puts me back there. So I've selected that entire range. It's like 2,000 items. That's my sum range. I'm going to do the same thing. My first criteria, I'll go ahead and make that the region. Place my cursor at the first value in the region. Press down and hold down my shift key. Look over, press and release the end key. Then press and release the down arrow. then release the Shift key, then press and release the F4. That'll make it absolute, comma, and then West right here. I'll select that, and we want that to be absolute as well. So I press the F4 key, comma, and the final range is sales rep, so I'll place my cursor, the first value in sales rep, press and hold the Shift key, press and release the End key, press and release the down arrow, then release the Shift key. Then I'll press F4. That makes it absolute, comma. Now the criteria is a sales rep, and I want to leave that relative because as I copy this down, I want to look at each sales rep in the list. I'll close that with the right parenthesis, press Enter. Then I'll just go up and double click my autofill node, go down a few, go down to Stevens here, press F2 to see if things are working. And sure enough, I'm looking up here at West. I'm looking at my regions. I'm looking at my sales rep. I'm looking at the correct sales rep. I'm looking at sales. So my values are entered correctly. And that concludes the SUMIF, SUMIFS, COUNTIF, COUNTIFS exercise.